Hey folks, I am using my internal mic on my laptop because I'm still dealing with sound issues. Um, this is an ongoing saga. We have 7 people who are tuned in at the moment. Welcome to Notes and Accords Animalics. I'll be right back with you. I'm just going to play a little bit of music here while I try to sort out the sound issues. If anybody in the chat can just confirm that they can hear me fine just through the internal mic, that would be excellent. And I will be back with you very shortly. Why don't we just play? Actually, here's a suggestion. I'm going to play that intro again, and I want to see who can identify each of those animals and one flora, one plant that is featured in that intro. I'm going to play it once again. Let's see, out of those who are tuned in at the moment, who can name all of them. So I'll be right back in a moment. We're going to play that intro again. See you in a bit. Okay, folks, can you hear me fine right now? I am currently using this Yeti that I've had for almost 2 years, and it has not been cooperative. Past couple times I've been doing live streams. So just let me know if you can hear me fine in the chat. And if so, we'll proceed. If not, we'll just return to the internal mic. I would prefer clearer, crisper audio, but if we have to resort to the internal mic, that will just have to do. So 11 people who are tuned in, just confirm in the chat that you can hear me fine. I don't want to be sitting here, blah, 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 blah. If you can hear me fine, just let me know. For those who had just looked at or viewed the, the intro, if they could name all of those animals and one vegetation in the intro. They're all animalic, obviously. We have, this is the good old college try here. Bilbo Fraggins mentions Cocker Spaniel, hamster, and rhubarb. Okay, close but no cigar. The intro went so quickly, it was hard to guess. I'm going to ask with musk deer and civet. Those were 2 of them. And then there were 2 other little furry animals there as well. Great to see you, Emily. We are, as if I have a team. I am packing together, putting together your 4 full bottle grab bag and sample pack, and I should get that out to you next week. Thank you for your patience. And we have Danny here. Scent of the day, the Black Knight, Francesca Bianchi, and Animalic for sure. We have 18 people who are tuned in at the moment. And I think we'll get things started. Hey there, Joe. Great to see you, my old friend. My old friend, very old friend. He's much older than I am by at least 30 years. You're most welcome. Thank you so much for being patient. One thing I'm not known for is for prompt shipping with these. So anybody who's really patient, it's really appreciated to me. I'm a very busy man, too busy. I need to cut some things back so that I have a little bit more work-life balance. But thank you, Emily, for your patience. Fernando, great to see you. 19 people who were tuned in. All right. So for those who are tuned in, can you name 4 different animals for which we are provided with wonderfully smelling animalic notes? Can somebody name 4 animals that produce smelly materials that have been historically used in perfumery? Let's see who can answer. 4. We're looking for 4 of them. Emily, you can join in and you can name you can include the 2 that you identified earlier with your 4. And we'll get started here. What we usually do with the Notes and Accords live stream is I begin with the first hour going over the raw materials that I've set aside to discuss. And then as we move into the next hour, we start talking about examples of the animalic fragrances that are in my collection. And then you have an opportunity as well to share the animalic fragrances that tickle your fancy and put a little spring in your step and a little mojo into the hojo, a tiger in your tank. Danny Actel, deer, whale, civet, beaver. Wonderful. Those are 4 great examples. There are other animals too. There are 2 that I'm thinking of. 2 mammals. Who can think of the other 2 mammals? There's actually technically 3, but one is not really used in perfumery, and I'm excited to share that material. Doesn't really come up in perfumery at all, but they do have a gland that produces a fragrant material. We have High Cap 06, civet, deer, beaver, whale. You got beaver, you got the other little furry animal. Now, there is a lesser known furry animal that has seen a lot of presence in more recent indie perfumery. And this little tiny animal is native to South Africa, or the southern part of the continent. And we don't actually have to disturb this animal in any way whatsoever to get this material. And this little creature may look rodent-like, but he's actually more closely related to, of all animals, the elephant. So let's see if you can guess that one. Skunk. I do know that some experimental perfumers have dabbled with the idea of using skunk in perfume. That would have to be a very low concentration, a very, very low dilution, because the skunk odor I believe it can be detected 1 in several million parts, if I'm even articulating that correctly, that if you were to put a fraction of a milliliter into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, it could be detected by the human nose. It is extremely strong. Oh, yes. We have the answer. Jarajda has the correct answer. It is the hyrax. The hyrax, who provides us with a material called hyraceum. It's also known as Africa stone. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit. Also, Dom Crathern also got the correct answer, hyrax. When I think of hyrax, I often think of Hydrox, which is the cookie, the alternative to Oreo, the one that actually allegedly predates Oreo, and Oreo stole the ideal from Hydrox. But there's no relation between Hydrox cookies and Hyrax, unfortunately. They smell very different too. All right, let's get things started here. First, I just want to remind folks that you can buy me a coffee here, buymeacoffee.com/Joseph Kolbe P. Each coffee is worth $5. You can buy 1. You can buy several if you want to continue to support this content. And I do have one more This is the final one because I've run out of the full bottles for this offer. I have one more 4 full bottle grab bag and sample pack offer, and that would be for 12 coffees. But I will continue to offer the sample pack for 6 coffees. So that's at buymeacoffee.com/Joseph Kolb P. All right. It's feeling a little quiet. I usually like to play a little bit of music with these. So why don't I bring up the playlist and we'll play a little something. Go over here to my brand palette and we'll play something kind of nice, preferably something that doesn't have any sort of licensing issues that will cause me to be demonetized for this stream. So let's see. Going to try to choose one that isn't going to be an issue. Let's see. Okay, how about this one? Get that one started here. Ooh, it sounds like the wilderness. Really good. All right. Well, that's great because this is all about adding wilderness to perfume, right? There's an erotic force to Animalics. It gives perfumes depth, substance. It is a reflection of our own animal nature. There's a very primal, visceral response that we get from these animalic notes. And it takes a skilled hand, a skilled perfumer to incorporate these animalic notes in such a way so that they prove to be evocative, but also balanced in the composition, so that they really support and flatter everything else in the perfume, rather than become the central force. And we do know that there's some perfumes that end up being the central. I like how Cocker Spaniel Hamster Rhubarb has been sitting there this whole time. Why don't we get that one off here? Okay. There is an art to imparting the animal notes into a fragrance, and it isn't always successful with perfumers. There may be some animalic fragrances that come to mind for you that I probably won't be discussing because I think that for my own personal taste, they veer too much into the animal realm as to be almost a perfume art rather than a wearable creation. So that might be the case if some of these examples of very heavily animalic fragrances are not part of my collection. Be that as it may, I love Animalics. Eau de porta potty, if not balanced, yes. And there are plenty of those where the ambitious perfumer wants to highlight just how fascinating these animalics are, but they end up dampening everything else, and it becomes this grotesque fragrance that is not eminently wearable, not necessarily a true perfume. And that's a strong opinion, but we might talk about a few of those a little bit later. All right, we'll get started with talking about the perfume materials. We have 19 people tuned in. Thank you so much all for tuning in. Imagine if I had 19 coffees purchased right now. I would be a very happy camper, and I could continue to grow this channel. What does that mean, growing this channel? Isn't it growing already? I'm trickling in some subscribers. I have a newer camera now. It's a little bit better than the camera that came with my laptop. But what does that mean? Well, it means that I would be able to access even better forms of I could get a new microphone for better sound and not deal with the microphone issues that I have. I could also pay for the StreamYard subscription through this, through having coffees bought. It's not just for the perfume fund, and that's a whole other story as it is, because that collection is grinding to a halt. I'm actually selling now more than I'm buying. Roadkill is not a musk. No, it is not. We really shouldn't be taking roadkill and using it for any purpose involving fragrance. There are some definite health risks to that as well. Not recommended. Not recommended. That's actually quite disturbing. My favorite Africa Oliphant. Yes. That's actually an example of where I feel like it is taken to a level that exceeds my threshold. I do have a review for that I posted on Fragrantica and Base Notes. All right, we're going to start with some show and tell. Someone mentioned whale earlier. And the specific whale that we're talking about is the sperm whale. I have seen ambergris or ambergris. I have seen it represented with a humpback whale and a blue whale. It is actually the sperm whale that we get ambergris, and we don't have to go after the whale. In fact, we haven't really done that in a while for obvious reasons. We rely on it to wash on shore. So here in this brown velvet pouch is my piece of light gray ambergris. So we see here, this is actually giving off its aroma just as is. And we know that there's something really fascinating and mysterious about the whole story of ambergris. How the quality of the ambergris is completely dependent upon the amount of time that it has been floating on the sea's surface. We have the darker black ambergris, which is fresher, much more fecal. And then it gets lighter over time and lighter till we have the white ambergris, which is the most highly coveted and finest ambergris. And this is just a step below that. This ain't too shabby itself. This is some beautiful light gray ambergris from New Zealand. So to give you a little bit of a description on ambergris, besides it being the most effective exalting fixative that is available from nature, it enhances almost every fragrance that it is added into, if you have it, if it is obtained, if it is available to the perfumer, which it is. And there are commercial perfumes that do contain it in small quantities. They tend to be much more high-end, much more expensive because of how rare ambergris really is. They say that the difference before ambergris and after ambergris is like moving from a two-dimensional picture to a three-dimensional image. So it's very special. Now, there are facsimiles that work pretty well. It may include some real ambergris. For example, IFF has something called ambergris tea olefac, and it's a substitute for a traditional 3% tincture of ambergris, and it has that ambergris character, the rich woody nuances, the dry amberiness, the salty marine quality, the rosiness, the tobacco, the animal, the old wood, the musty and the dusty and the camphorous. All of it together, and which is a great addition to the palette for those who can't afford to have their own ambergris and dilute it. Now, of course, we also know that there are modern fixatives such as Cetylox and Ambrox and Broxin, which are more of a cross-section of what you would get from ambergris, because it does have the components that are found in the scent profile of ambergris. However, you're not getting the whole experience of ambergris through those materials. So when you smell that, it is only just this thin cross-section of it. And if I'm not mistaken, the main component is ambronol. If I'm not mistaken, it's ambronol. That's what it's called. Darren, I know that you're in the chat. You might be able to correct me if that is incorrect, but I think that that's what it is. Now, Ambroxan typically uses the feedstock. This is interesting. That uses the feedstock of clary sage, Salvia sclaria. So that's a fun fact. And it is widely used in perfume now because it has a very similar fixative quality. But does it have that magic of ambergris? Not quite. The closest that you can get to that quality would be perhaps use some sort of base like the oliphac or an actual ambergris tincture. Thank you, Darren. Thank you. I appreciate your confirming with me. And I'm glad to see that we have a fan of your excellent work here. This is the real deal. And it smells gorgeous. Like, this is how I know. I actually have tinctured some of this, and this is how I just know, and I can pick it up when there is real ambergris in a fragrance. Is through my experience, my intimate experience with the actual material. And for those who want to learn more about ambergris and want a good book to read, I would highly recommend reading Floating Gold, which I'm just checking to see if I have it here. And I don't think I do, but I thought I had it in the fragrance library over here, but I must have placed it somewhere else. But Floating Gold, that is your literature recommendation. Great book on the history and the mystique of ambergris. So that's the first material I'd like to share. The ambergris oliphac I have in a vial, but I couldn't locate it in the vastness of all my materials. But I figured it, to one up that and actually share my piece of ambergris. So we'll start off with that. Now, ambergris transcends animalic, actually, because it can very well show up in fragrances that aren't necessarily all that animalic, but it does and can add that effect to a lot of perfumes. Why don't we choose another selection from our from our tunes here? Give us a second here. All right. Just let me know if the overlaid music is too loud. I can actually adjust it. We're at 23. Maybe I'll bring that down to 21 on the volume. Okay, back to the chat. 26 people tuned in. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already done so, please hit the like button. It does help with the YouTube algorithm. The more likes, the more visible this content is. That's just how it works. So hit the like and it would be greatly appreciated. Yes, one of the best fragrances to feature true, real ambergris with maybe some of that ambergris olfactory to boost it and to extend it is the Lorenzo Villaresi's Ambra. Stellar stuff. That's one of my favorite ambergris fragrances. Niall, wonderful to see you. Niall from New Zealand. Oh, yeah. So this is the reason why I'm pronouncing it ambergris, because there's a debate on this pronunciation depending upon who you're around, where you are, where you're from. This is actually what I learned from the book Floating Gold, is that there's this tendency to pronounce it ambergris. But in French, if we're going to pronounce it in French, ambergris is exactly how it would be pronounced. So that's just my explanation for that. I swear to God, I stuck with the ambergris because of the book Floating Gold. But thank you very much. Encens Mythique, yes, another one. There's a debate as to whether there's a real ambergris, but I could swear that there is. It smells like there is. Maybe they just did some trickery by using the IFF oliphac base with some other stuff to really give that impression. But yeah, I could swear that some of it is there. Yes, there are ambergris, ambergris. I don't think that there is one right way to pronounce it. So I actually alternate between the different pronunciations as I go along. Ambrose of Plan. Very nice. Okay, so we talked about ambergris or ambergris or ambergris. We're going to move on to the next material. But I'd like somebody in the audience to choose the next material. What do you want to talk about next? Let's hear it from you folks. I wish I could tell you, Emily. I'm not even familiar with Sol Salgado. It's one that I haven't sampled yet. Thank you. It's great to see you popping in here. I know that you need to work, but hopefully you can jump in here and there. Yes. Okay, Emily. That's what we'll do next. And it looks like we have a veritable consensus. Civet. Oh, so speaking of pronunciation, I often hear this pronunciation civet. Now, I don't know where that came from, but it seems to have become an infection in the community. I hadn't really heard that pronunciation until recently with certain YouTubers. But for the record, I have only known it as civet, not civet, not E-T-T-E. That's what it sounds like it would be spelled. Civet. It's like in phonics, it's sort of like that second syllable is just an abrupt syllable. Civet, civet, would it be civet? In French, do we have our usual French residents, French speakers here? I really do rely on Philippe Alex to help me out with that. Danny, if you are a French speaker, would it be civet? Let me know. But I often hear civet. So would there be a hard T or a soft T? Well, we're not going to spend the entire stream talking about the pronunciation. Why don't we just get to it? Civet. Okay, civet. So maybe I was wrong. Civet's probably just the anglicized version. Maybe these people are a little fancier than I thought. And they actually are up on it more than I am. So civet. Civetone. I was thinking of I actually going to talk about that in a little bit. Here is some of my civet absolute, and believe it or not, there is actually the Latin name for the animal here, Vivera civetta. So civet is a material that isn't really meant to be inhaled in pure form. It isn't pretty in its pure form. We'll give it that. So the initial aroma of a civet absolute. Now civet absolute kind of looks a bit like earwax and has a similar consistency. I don't know if I want to demonstrate. Let me see. It isn't a very pretty looking material. I don't know if you can even see that, but it is a very earwaxy looking orange, yellow, almost poopyish looking material. So the initial aroma is overbearing. It's almost vile, slightly fecal, but not entirely so. But the magic that comes from civet is the dilution. The dilution is where we see it come into play in perfume. So people are not putting gobs of civet into perfume. They're diluting it to a very low level. And that dilution can be 1% and would be remarkably evident. When it's diluted, it's musky. It's sort of smoky. It's sweet. And there's that animal magic to it, that velvety kind of quality to it. And it just does this alchemic sort of magic to a perfume bouquet. It just makes flowers really come alive. It makes woods more dimensional. it just adds this realism to certain materials in a perfume. Like, surprisingly, it can make roses seem rosier and vanilla seem more vanilla-like. Think about Jiki, one of the earliest fougères. Jiki is a vanilla based Coumarinic fougère, and that civet is what really makes everything kind of shine. It's remarkable stuff. Now, as far as whether or not true civet or synthetic civet is used, and then also the ethical arguments regarding that, it is difficult to determine if civet absolute is ethically sourced, because the way that it is obtained is through a method of agitation, and that agitation of the glands of the civet requires discomfort. And many may argue that that sort of discomfort or even pain is unethical to the animal. So there are some beliefs that there are civet producers that are treat their animals with more respect and ethics, but it is of the belief that it is very difficult to collect civet in large quantities without there being, at minimum, some serious discomfort for the animal. That aside, I do own some civet for reference. I feel like this civet would stand to get some good use, since it is a good quantity. And I am not a vegan or a vegetarian, but I also do believe in avoiding animal cruelty at all costs. So that being said, I haven't done any recent research on what producers or providers of civet absolute are ethical, if that is even a thing. Maybe Darren, if you know, where we would source civet today ethically. So for those who might have any concerns about the ethical sourcing of civet or the use of it because you may be vegan or you may want to avoid animal cruelty at all costs, there are, of course, synthetic alternatives. And I have some Civetone in here. So Civetone is a base that embodies all of the warm, sensuous, animalic, musky qualities. It's very powerful. It's very diffusive. And this is just a transparent liquid that in colder temperatures will easily turn into a solid. And this is a very common replacer for civet. So it does smell very similar to it without some of that je ne sais quoi, much like with ambergris, that is near impossible to reproduce so that it is exactly like civet. There is also something called lactoscatone or lactoscatone. This is produced by Simrise. And this is an interesting material. If you think of the name, lactoscatone, Lactoscatone, there are lactones and there's scatol. I opted not to bring the scatol with me because that is locked Fort Knox-like in multiple boxes because it is absolutely foul to handle. But this is sort of, it's a base that contains it. And it also kind of smells indolic too. And this can also be used in putting together a civet reproduction. And there's plenty of different types of civet replacers that use different materials, natural, synthetic, all combined, that can replace civet. Now, it's funny because I often read reviews or commentary on perfumes, and people will say this urinous civet, this urine-like civet. And what's interesting to me is civet isn't necessarily very urine-like. So I think what people might be picking up is something else in the mix there. To me, it is very subtly fecal, not full on. And most of the time, that's barely picked up. More so, I might pick up these interesting sort of like the slightest hint of halitosis. I know that's gross too, not quite as gross as poop, but that kind of like a little bit of a bad breath kind of thing. Little bit. And those are the much more civet forward fragrances. But most of the time when I'm picking up civet and fragrance, it is on sort of the precipice of all of those things without actually being forthright. So that it isn't, outright offensive. Unless, of course, we're talking about some of those examples in indie perfume and some niche perfume where they really wanted to push the envelope. Civet isn't as scary and gross as I think some people might think in most instances. As a note, synthetic or natural. So Darren says, ethical is a sliding scale in my opinion. And Dani says, just from Frank Boclet, had a lot of it. I remember reading about that fragrance a while back. Frank Boclet had his sort of 15 minutes there for a while, and his fragrances were discussed a great deal. Okay, we're at 7:38 p.m. in my time zone, so we're 38 minutes into the live stream. Now that we've talked a little bit about civet, how about we choose the next one? What do you guys want to hear about? One thing is we're gonna gloss over castoreum, and the reason for that is that we already talked a great deal about castoreum in the leather notes and accords live stream. So that's going to be more of a footnote, even though it is clearly animalic. So something other than castoreum. Where do we want to go next? Let's hear from the chat. Sure enough, you mentioned castoreum, but let's choose something else, Daniel. Well, I'll gloss over castoreum. We know that castoreum is from the castor sacs of a beaver. They have been the castoreum has traditionally been used in leather accords, leather fragrances. It is inherently animalic, but it also has all these interesting facets that are not necessarily associated with the animalic. There's a certain sort of sweetness to it and a certain earthy woodiness and resinousness that almost makes it resemble labdanum in some ways as well. But if you want to hear me talk ad nauseum about castoreum, just rewind to the Notes and Accords leather stream, and I really get into detail about castoreum. Deer musk. Well, yes, we can talk about deer musk. However, I don't have any deer musk in my possession. I used to. But I ended up selling it to someone. And also, that is when we're talking about ethics, that's the one where deer musk has not been legal in perfume making, at least. Well, I don't know about legal. I suppose it would be legal in the final product, but as far as producing it, there are a lot of issues with it as far as legality and, of course, ethics, because it is an endangered species. And it does require the killing of the animal to retrieve the musk pods. But what we can talk about is some great replacers for deer musk. And I have a couple of those at hand. The first one we have is a base, a classic base, and this is called Tonquitone. So Tonquitone, from the origin of the name musk tonkin. And here is the vial that I have of it. An interesting color. Tonquitone is a base, so it is an amalgamation of different materials to resemble deer musk. And according to my notes, if I just want to recall who produces it, IFF produces it, and it is really realistic. It is very similar to the smell of deer musk. And if we're talking about something that is somewhat urinous, this is what we're looking at. Deer musk. Deer musk has a little bit more of a urinous quality. Urinous, but also warm and woody and sweet and just feral, furry, fuzzy. Unwashed human hair, animal fur, dirty socks, all kinds of things. Tonquatone was famously used in a lot of fragrances from the mid-century onward when it began being produced. There's a large quantity of it in Kiehl's original musk. We'll talk a little bit about that one. And of course, it made a presence in a lot of men's fragrances in the late 70s, early 80s. The original Ted Lapidus Pour Homme, that has a lot of Tonquatone. Portos, Tonquatone, the Balenciaga Portos. Kouros, we'll talk about the next one. The next one that I'm going to talk about as far as musk replacers is more of a presence in it than necessarily Tonquatone. So that's Tonquatone. Lovely, lovely stuff. Also, the classic gold dial accord of florals and musks includes Tonquatone and this next material, which is called Animalics. Let's bring Animalics here. Here we go. Actually, let me see here. There we go. There we are. Animalics 1745 from Cinerome. Animalics is gorgeous. Animalics was originally, and we're going to move on to this next material. This is going to give you a hint. Originally contained some naturals that are not in it anymore, but there's still a lot of naturals in it. There's naturals and there's synthetics. There's different musks in it. Muscinone, muscone. I think they used to use musk ketones, just different musks, different macrocyclic musks. There used to be more nitro musks in it, but now we have other musks that are, that don't have the same restrictions or haven't been banned. And interestingly enough, cedarwood is in it as well. Because as I was mentioning earlier, there is an interesting raw woody quality to deer musk, so it makes sense that we would have an appearance of cedarwood. So it's lovely, lovely stuff. This is what is featured in prominence in the earlier formations of Kouros, and in a number of other fragrances from that time period. You can think of one beautiful animalic amber from the early 90s, Loewe's Gala, has a lot of Animalics in it. Now, this is Animalics 1745. There's actually more than one. There is also Animalics Hypo or Ipo. Animalics Hypo 27 from Cinerome. And this is a variation of the Animalics Accord. And this one is much brighter and soapier and cleaner, if you can believe it. Fresh. It's fresher than the other Animalics. Woody, herbal almost. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. But still characteristically animalic, though. It still has a little bit of that, bodily secretion kind of element to it, or sweat and secretions and body odor and animal warmth to it. But it's sort of it's the underpinning of it, where all of this soapy, clean, herbal, almost minty kind of interesting stuff is happening in the top. It's very cool stuff. Now, there's another one that I have, and it's called Muscarome, and I have it in a 10% tincture. Look at this one. Muscarome J5. This is also produced by Cinerome. This is an early Cinerome specialty, still in production as far as I know. And this is the closest to Tonkin musk tincture that I've smelled. Very strong, very animalic, musky, woody, sensual, dry. Straight out of the vial, it smells like unbathed bodies. That certain funk of many weeks of being unbathed, we'll say. Obviously, the intention for it to be added into perfume is not for it to smell like that, but for it to be dosed very lightly to impart that authentic feel of deer musk. Really potent, gorgeous stuff. And then we have another base, which is the Shangri-Lead or Shangri-Lide base produced by IFF. Another sensual, sweet, animalic musk. And this one's a little bit leathery, floral, woody. A lot of galaxolide is in this base. Galaxolide is a very commonly used musk. It is sort of the laundry musk. It forms the fixative crux of a lot of perfumes as well. But there's all these different captives and high impact materials. Very rich, similar to deer musk. Really diffusive. And from my notes, it is great when paired with a fougere accord. And I can recognize Shangri-La in a few different fragrances. So those are the deer musk replacements that I have. There are a few others, but those are the ones that are most commonly used. So there you have it. That's our coverage of deer musk. And then what do we have left? You know, we already talked about ambergris. We talked about civet. We talked a little bit about castoreum and deer musk. So what do we have left for the animals? We mentioned it earlier. Thank you, Darren. That this is really humbling coming from you because you're extremely knowledgeable and talented. So I thank you for your willingness to tune in. Thank you very much, Emily. Yeah, isn't it? It's just some really intense stuff. Just really great muscarone. So we're going to talk about hyrax, the hyraceum rather. Little creatures that have dedicated places on the mounds and the hills on which they live, where they poopy and pee-pee and whatever else they need to rid their bodies of. And over time, this excrement, it calcifies, it hardens, it dries, it ages, it's baked in the sun, it transmogrifies, it transforms, it evolves into something that's quite evocative. This is some Africa stone tincture or hyraceum. This is some that I purchased from Mandy Aftel at Eftelier Perfumes. Let's open this sucker up. And it's great to see hyrax making an appearance. Oh, it's a little bit tough. Let's hope I don't. There we go. I opened it. It's cool to see it making an appearance in a lot of niche perfume. Woo! Oh, goodness. That's some potent stuff. This is This has a lot going on. It's pretty complex material. You know, some of it does smell like pee, some of it smells like weird animal musky hormone kind of stuff going on being released. But there's all these other different facets. You name it, you know, woods, tobacco, you know, there's almost like resinous qualities to it as well. There's a strange saline kind of quality to it, which is fascinating. There are aspects of civet and aspects of castoreum, sort of like it's kind of like everything all at once. Civet, castoreum, a little bit of deer musk, a little bit of, you know, vegetal kind of craziness in it. Ambrette, even. It's a very faceted material, Hyraceum. So the absolute, it has to be tinctured, is extremely strong. And like I said, this is the byproduct of the symbiosis of the environment and the excrement, the excreta of the rock hyrax. The stone collecting hinders neither the animal life nor the habitat and is subjected to fair trade practices. These animals are not harmed, they're not disturbed. There is no need to even go near the animals to obtain this material. We see it in zoologist hyrax, obviously, which showcases it. And in another one that I'll be talking about later. I don't want to give it all away, or else I won't have much to talk about in the second hour. So somebody mentioned indole. Let's look at the chat here. Indole, yes. We're not going to really talk about indole, though, because I think indole is not necessarily one that we want to have impart animal qualities to, because it is much more a floralizer, honestly. And Darren, if you could confirm otherwise, indole is really meant to build flowers so that decaying, ripe, just completely, just like that liminal space between fresh and decay, that you have those indoles in jasmine and gardenia and other florals. So I didn't really choose it as an animalic because it doesn't really come up necessarily as an animalic note, although there is something kind of animalic in it, in the fact that indole is also something that's present in animal feces. So the fecal quality is what gives it that animal character, although it's just a shade that is included to really flesh out the florals and maybe flesh out some other materials. That being said, it is also used in civet replacements, so it does have a role there, but I decided not to make it its own sort of like category here. It's a good suggestion, though. You're not far off at all. It's definitely worthy of asking if that makes an appearance in the discussion. AM, good to see you. Sent to the day, Domenico Caracini, 1913 EDP. You're doing just fine, my friend. No need to worry about whether or not you're scoring. We're not taking tabs of. It was a good suggestion. It's just my reasoning behind not including indole. It was just my own decision. Yes, indole is found naturally in jasmine and other white florals. Thank you very much, Darren. Not sure if I've ever smelled hyrax. Hyrax hadn't traditionally been used in perfume, at least commercial modern perfume globally, until rather recently. You know, you didn't really see a hyrax note until the 21st century. Beeswax is a nice suggestion. I did not include beeswax, but it is one that is, if I included everything that has animalic facets to it, we'd be here all night. But that is another good suggestion because it does have that. It does have kind of that animalic feel to it, especially when it's dosed a bit higher in fragrances. So I think that is worthy of mention for sure. So we went through all of the animals except for one, and this is what I was talking about earlier. Here's an interesting one. I have right here muskrat musk tincture. Muskrat musk tincture. That's right, you heard it. Muskrat musk tincture. This is from Apothecary's Garden. And I have the website in the description. It is run by Dan Riegler. You can also visit him at apothecarys.garden on Instagram. This isn't tincture. And according to him, I have the notes on this particular tincture from Dan himself. And he states that this is not a true extract nor a simple tincture. It is a 5-fold tincture. He says that's a better way to describe it. He ran fresh ground material through the alcohol 5 times before he was satisfied with the aroma. And it is made from the ground scent glands of the North American muskrat from animals that were trapped for their fur. It lends a soft, warm, animalic note to perfumes. Interesting. It has a different scent profile. There's some similarities to deer musk. There's some similarities to castoreum. But it has its own facets to it that are unique. Haven't done enough analysis of this. But how fascinating is that? It is not traditionally used in perfume. There could be some reasons for that. But it is a great conversation piece. And it would be interesting to see this having more presence in perfume. It is all depending upon, once again, we could visit the topic of ethics. Because with Dan, he used the animals that were already trapped for their fur, just like with castoreum. The beavers are already trapped for other reasons, for their fur, to get the castor sacs. So, interesting stuff. AM says, animalic notes are still challenging for me, so this is an interesting stream. Hello. A lifestyle not for sale. Been here before. Well, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Ricky Tomatoes are animalic musks traditionally used as fixatives, now useless in perfumery. Not necessarily. Depends on what you mean by animalic musks. There's plenty of animalic musks that I was just discussing earlier, which are useful, very useful as fixatives, and also to impart qualities into a perfume. If you're talking about natural animalic musks, we went through all the different animalic materials, whether they're musky or not, that impart animalic qualities. So they're quite useful. It just depends on what you're referring to specifically. We were talking about deer musk. Deer musk is not really used in modern perfume for various reasons, including the fact that it's an endangered, CITES-protected species. Although independent perfumers can choose it at their own discretion, there are arguments as to whether or not it's ethical to even, support that kind of trade. And HighCab06, ferrets produce some musk of their own. And ferrets, if I'm not mistaken, are they distantly related to civet? I think they're in the weasel family, and civet is maybe probably another adjacent family of animals. They're not felines, although they're often called civet cats. All right. So the only thing that we have left here, I think we went through everything but one botanical material that is an animalic. One that is significantly animalic, and can anyone name that? It was also in the intro, which you will be seeing again in the intermission shortly. And who can name that particular botanical material, that plant? Let's see if somebody can name it. We have 26 people tuned in. If you haven't already hit the like button, please do so. If somebody can give me a like tally, that would be awesome. We can just do a check-in on how many likes there are. Also, once again, If you'd be so kind, buy me a coffee, buymeacoffee.com/JosephColdP. And we have the link pinned at the top of the chat board. Fernando says, you mentioned that animalic notes can be erotic or they can trigger a primal primitive response. Can you talk about that? Sure. When we're reminded of our own bodily carnality, if you will, the things that how we smell in places that are unmentionable, our sweat glands, so perspiration, and anything that exudes from our bodies, anything that happens during coitus. A lot of these animalic materials can evoke that, they can evoke sex. They can evoke fleshy living beings. We're living animals. It can enhance that. It can enhance, the perfume was once thought to be more of an enhancement of one's own natural odor rather than to cover it. Our movement towards covering up didn't start to happen until the late 20th century, and is especially so in the 21st century. But the purpose of these animalics, not only what they do with the other materials and how they synergize with them, but also how they synergize with our own bodies, how they enhance the way that we smell. And that's what I mean by that. It's a very primitive, instinctual. It's a response in our brain when we smell these things. Some of us have associations where we're uncomfortable with that response, so we might reject it. We might avoid it. Some of us might lean into it and feel very comfortable with it and crave it. And then you have, a lot of people who are somewhere in between. And it all depends on how much or how little of it is in a perfume that might appeal to them or repel them. That's a very good guess, Gerajda and Brett, because it is a vegetal musk. It is a botanical musk. However, it isn't, to me, in my opinion, it is only very subtly animalic. There's so many more facets to it that kind of go in directions where when it's added to a fragrance, it doesn't really give that kind of animalic. It doesn't push too far in that direction, but it's a good suggestion. I think that it's worthy of mention as well. I would have included it if I had more time, so it's a great suggestion. I also almost included angelica root because it's also another botanical material that has musk molecules that can be vaguely musky and animalic. It also begs the question, what is animalic versus musky? Or are they one and the same? Do we have a Venn diagram where there's some overlap, where some things are musky but they're not animalic, and some things are animalic but they're not musky? That's an interesting discussion in itself. Daniel G says, this feels like when my dad sat me down for the talk. I'm gonna start drawing some diagrams. Yes, the labia majora, labia minora. Yeah, it can kind of seem like that, but I think that's as good of a description as it gets. It speaks to our feral erotic desires and our animal being, so that's what I kind of meant by that earlier. Oud, another honorable mention. For those of you who know me very well, they may know that I'm not the hugest fan of oud, believe it or not. I only have a very small handful of fragrances that prominently feature it. Oud can have an animalic feel to it, but has so many different qualities to it and so many different types of oud that it's almost like it's a whole category unto itself. So it's a good honorable mention, but that's not it. This botanical material, I'm hoping somebody guesses it soon. I'll give it like one more minute. Human is another animalic. Yes, Seclusion Magnifique. Woo, that one is definitely the reproduction of human smells. Some disturbing ones, too. I actually wrote a really recent review on it, finally, after many years, and I posted it for Grantica and Base Notes. You can check that out. Spikenard. I love spikenard. Spikenard is like it smells like flora and fauna together. It's sort of in the vicinity of patchouli, but not quite. Sort of in the vicinity of valerian, but not quite. It has like this aromatic stinkiness or stinky aromaticness. It is very uncommon in perfume, but I wish it was featured more frequently. Another lovely material. That's another great honorable mention. But leather is like a whole other thing, my friend. Leather can be clean and it can be dirty. We actually did a leather stream. My first Notes in a Quart stream was leather. You should check that out because I go over all the leather materials and my leather fragrances. But yeah, you could definitely, in a diagram, you could sort of have like a subcategory of animalic leather for sure. Darren has the answer. It is costus root. That is the last material that I'm going to be talking about. And we're going to start off with a CO2 of costus root that I have here. And this is from our dearly departed white Lotus Aromatics. This is a little vial of costus root CO2. The Latin name is Sausoria lapa. This is from India. Otherworldly when you smell it on its own. If anybody follows Olivier David, he is a Nez, my goodness, there goes my French. He's a Nez contributor, Nez magazine. He recently did a post where he was showing the raw material of costus, shaved, broken down, distilled. Costus root is remarkable material. Smells like it comes from an animal, but it is indeed from a plant, and a plant that is distantly related to galangal and ginger, believe it or not. Now, what's cool about costus is it not only is it warm and woodsy and feels like soft and plush, but it also is powdery violet orris as well, and that's just like on top of what makes it animalic. There's this fattiness, there's this wine-like undertone too, which is fascinating. Like, it's just such a complex, beautiful, beguiling material. So I do feel that costus has this adjacency to orris root. It is like the animalic, sebaceous, oily cousin to it. It smells like it has aspects of like scalp and hair and sebum, like the smell of like skin secretions, the smell of like dog fur, goat fur, animal husbandry. It is just so incredible. And nothing is quite like the raw material, but there are some facsimiles, some approximations thereof that come like 98% close, thankfully for the perfumer, because costus is now heavily restricted, if not banned. Darren, if you could confirm, is costus actually banned now, the natural material? I might be incorrect, but if you can confirm that. So we're going to talk about the replacers, which are great as well. So this was the real material, CO2, carbon dioxide extraction of the plant material. And then I have Costus olifant from IFF. We're going to go back to the chat for a second. JJ, you need to invite Darren again and talk at least briefly about animalic notes. Yeah, that would be wonderful. I of course, I would love to have Darren back sometime soon. We'll make sure that he comes back as a panelist. Thank you. I am humbled by that and charmed. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. It's great to see you, Mishi. And it is banned. I missed the comment. Yes, the natural material is banned. The best use of Costus, we'll get to that in a little bit. Although I do want to point out, I was mentioning Animalics earlier, and I didn't want to give it away. Animalics, the original Animalics base included real Costus, but now it has Costus replacers. Once again, Costus replacers, they ain't no slouch. They still smell very much like Costus. Yes, Ambilux. I have another one from Marlou that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. So this is the Costus Olfac. So I just smelled my natural CO2 extraction. So the Costus Olfac, lovely stuff, very similar. I do pick up a little bit of suederol in it. I do pick up a little bit of suederol to probably fix it together, but very similar. It's very similar, the Costus Olfac, to pure genuine Costus. So Costus Olfac it's leathery, a little bit more leathery, but it's still very much that caustic. I guess that's appropriate. It's still very much that Costus feel, with some labdanum facets in it. I think it's a great replacer. Another one is Costausol. Costausol. Here we go. PFW produces Costausol or Costausol, and this is very this is reminiscent of the oil as well. But this is interesting too. What they did with the Costausol is they included some orris or like irones into it because of that. Like I was mentioning earlier, they are adjacent. They're very similar. It's very similar texturally. So you have these orris materials in there kind of fleshing it out. In a woodiness, a mossiness as well. But it does have, it's almost like a perfume in itself, the Costausol, but gorgeous. And there's no restriction in the use of this product from the time that I took these notes down. May have changed since then, according to the IFRA guidelines at that time. But it does have that spirit of the Costus. Both this Costus Olfac, use some of these together or individually, you can impart a Costus note into a fragrance without the need of using Costus root. But I love that I have real genuine Costus root as a reference, and am happy to report that these approximations are really close. And that was the plant that you saw at the introduction. All the little furry animals and then a plant. Patrick H. says Prin uses Costus a lot. I'm sure that he does. He does love using his Animalics. He loves overdosing them. Oh, it's been discontinued? What a shame. So are there any others, Darren, that are at the disposal of the perfumer that can replace Costus besides the Costus Olfac? Oh, that's sad. All right, so we're going to take a brief break, and then I'm going to come back, and we're going to talk about some of my animalic fragrances. I set aside about 10 of them to discuss. So we're going to take a little reprieve here, an intermission, and we will be back in a moment. See you in a bit. All right, we're back, and I'm going to now talk about some of the fragrances I'd set aside that showcase Animalics quite nicely, if I may say so myself. All right, so we'll get started. Of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention one of the most well-known and commercially successful Animalics. I do have one bottle here that is not silver shoulders. We're not going to talk about reformulations. That's a total buzzkill. We're not going to talk about it. We're just going to give props to. Ooh, there we go. It's blanching out in the okay at that angle. We can see Kuros from Yves Saint Laurent. I put some of this on. Still smells great. I actually do like that there are these fresh top notes in more recent bottles that gives the full fragrance profile, which is really hard to get when you have some older bottles here. One thing that I can say is, in spite of all of the discussion about Kuros being superior in its older forms, is that the top notes are all turned or gone in them, and somehow people like that regardless. But I like these aldehydic, aromatic top notes that are in the Kuros that you can't really, they're not really there in the same way in the vintages. And that just represents the whole vision that Pierre Bourdon had for Kuros. The Animalis base is still used in this. I do recall that there was an interview that Pierre Bourdon did with, I don't recall exactly who. It may have been Frederick Malle, where he lamented the prohibition of Costus, and it's what really gave it its sort of character. But like I said, I think that Costus can be approximated very well. I don't think that we necessarily have to mourn the complete loss of that effect in Perfume. So yeah, this is a more recent formulation, and I still find it fantastic. Let's just be grateful that it's still in production at all, or at least as far as I last realized. Can somebody update me? Is this still being made, or is this discontinued? But yes, this is it. King Kuros. It is in the Hall of Fame of Great Perfumes, and it is a classic animalic. Oh, great to see you, Oris Eros. I think I saw your comment earlier when I was talking about Oris Root. Sorry, I didn't highlight that comment. And you say, I put my sweatshirt on top of a 4-day-old blotter with Kuros on it earlier today. And then when I put my sweatshirt on it, it smelled of Kuros. It still packs a punch. I agree. 23 people who were tuned in here. Let me just gear up another tune. All right, the next one is a lesser known fragrance, and it is from Etienne Aigner, and this is silver. Also has that milky glass, just like the Kuros. This was released in 1984, and this is another really nice animalic that has castoreum, and I believe it also has tonquetone, but it also is woodsy and wildernessy and woody, sort of in a similar vein to Yatagan or Philius, but much more leaning in the animalic direction. And it is rather rare, unfortunately. I was able to score this sometime back in a splash bottle. Unfortunately, the silver on it is bubbling a little bit. I'm not sure why that started happening out of nowhere, but there's a little bubbliness going on, which is a bit disappointing. I hate to see that happen to a bottle. But other than that, it's a pretty attractive bottle and a very sexy scent. Let's see. I think I might have turned down the music. For some reason, I like having a little bit of music in the background. There we go. I like having that soundtrack. Okay, so we talked about Jicky, Guerlain Jicky, the Civet Fougère Extraordinaire. I actually wouldn't mind having a Parfum Estrée version of Jicky, but this EDP in this B bottle still smells exquisite, in my humble opinion. Once again, being somebody who collects vintages, I'm not going to push the whole vintage thing all the time because there is something to be lost, something to be gained, but also something to be lost with vintages. And I think with something as beautifully citrusy as Jiki, you may risk getting a vintage where a lot of those top notes have flattened and deteriorated. So I think that Guerlain has done a great job at preserving the integrity of Jiki after over a century. "23 people tuned in. Don't forget to hit the like. If somebody can give me a like count in the chat, just let me know what you see. It's a little bit difficult for me to check while I'm streaming here. So if anybody can tell me how many likes we have at the moment. Next in tow is from Barbara Herman's house, Eris Parfums, Ma Bête. Ma Bête, composed by Antoine Lee. We have 22 people who liked the stream. We have 25 people tuned in, so we could get at least 3 more, if not up to 30. Let's try to aim for 30 likes, folks. Ma Bête from Eris Parfums. Wonderful, sultry, carnal, erotic, very musky, very animalic, floral elements in it as well. It's a real knockout. It is not for the faint of heart, not for a namby-pamby. You have to have a certain sort of acquired taste to appreciate something just so sensuous. It's very sensuous. 23 likes, that's great. Let's try to aim for 30 if we can. Anybody a fan of Ma Bête? There's another fragrance from Eris Parfums that features ambergris in great quantity. Mix, XXX. If somebody wants a great reference ambergris with cacao and vanilla and all this fuzzy warmth. Here's one that isn't discussed a great deal. But definitely needs more recognition. And this is actually from Ehrlich Lang, New York, and it's called Aperture. And this pushes the envelope just enough without being too much. Love it. I might actually spray some of this on right now to talk about it. So this is not an accessible fragrance. Not accessible as far as like it would not have mainstream appeal at all, but there's something so captivating about it. It's very woody. It's very, very animalic, but not the kind of animalic that you would expect, if that makes any sense. I think the perfumer may have used Animalis in this, the Animalis base. And there is something very ambergris-like in it as well. And it just verges on being too much, but it doesn't quite go there. Like this, but this is definitely one where you wouldn't want to spray yourself a great deal. You just subtly spray maybe on your hand, the back of your neck, your chest. I have a review on base notes and Fragrantica. There aren't too many reviews of this fragrance, so my review should be easy to find. And it's very cedary as well. I love that the fact that cedar just melds so well with Animalics. It's just, it dovetails so well. One of my favorite animalic musks is one from Marc-Antoine Corticchiata. This is Musk Tonkin, Parfum d'Empire. And I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. And this is more than just an animalic musk, though. It's very floral. It's really a dimensional fragrance. It has that same, and it doesn't smell like it, but it has that same effect that, say, like Belle Versailles gives to me, where there is this contrast between leathery, animalic, skanky, and then like vanilla and resins. But the florals in the middle are really what form the core of it. It's to me, this exceeds Musk's Kublai Khan. Like, to me, this is what I hoped Musk's Kublai Khan would be. And for being such a huge Serge Lutens / Christopher Sheldrake fan, it fell short of my expectations, Musk's Kublai Khan, to be honest with you. Like, it just wasn't as eyebrow raising as I hoped it would be. But this fulfills that for me. Musk Tonkin. Regis Munton asks, do you think Guerlain en Sens Mythique uses much ambergris? It's quite possible. I was convinced that it used it, but it's mass produced, and it's a Guerlain. I mean, there could be a small amount of ambergris tincture in it. It really does smell like it is in it, or they did some trickery, there's some genius behind it that really makes it feel like there's ambergris in it. And I will say that as somebody who's very familiar with ambergris. Next in tow is one that features Hyrax that I quite enjoy. Hyraceum, Hyrax, is Monte Cristo from Mask. The owner and founder of Mask, rest in peace, and just passed away recently. So very sad news. The perfumer for Mask is the very talented Delphine Thierry. I'll spray some here. Very nice sprayers on these bottles. And I love the usage here, and this is definitely an example of shearing out the Africa stone, the Hyraceum, to really bring out these interesting qualities in it. Is anybody a fan of Monte Cristo? This one deserves a proper review. I should sit down and write my thoughts on it. Yeah, it's undeniably Hyraceum. It is really the centerpiece, the keystone of this. Woody, tobacco-like. Very warm and sensual, but not as loud as you would think, considering Hyraceum is used, which I like. Because if it were a loud Hyraceum, it would be a little overwhelming. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Someone earlier, forgive me that I had forgotten exactly whom, mentioned Marlou. And this is Carnicure. The light is, there we go. Carnicure from Marlou. Love these cork caps. And this is the sweet spot for me. Now, Marlou as a brand, the perfumer really has a talent for working with these animalic materials, but sometimes this is an example, like as far as Ambilux, which used to be, what was it called? Ambiguité, such and such. I remember when it was in its original formulation, I smelled it and I said to myself, this is too much even for me. Like, as an animalic lover, this literally does smell like urine-soaked underwear and soiled under things and dirty, unwashed bodies. And I couldn't find it in myself to actually wear it in public. It has since been tamed somewhat, but I still feel like it's just a little too aggressive in the dirtiness, even for me. But this is a great balance of dirty and also plush, powdery, musky, but not animalic musky. It's like dirty animalic musk with like clean laundry musk put together with some other elements. It's just a great balance. I think this is the most balanced creation. Carnicure. Really nice. This is one of my favorites in the Animalics category, for sure. And it reminds me of the next one, which is a classic. It is a classic. It's been around for quite some time. Kiehl's Original Musk. Kiehl's Original Musk with this great floral quality that interacts with the... And there's Animalis and Tonquatone. I think both of them are in here. There's a lot of it, at least in the version that I have. May have been reformulated. Don't know too much about that. I haven't smelled more recent bottles. Hopefully not too much, because I'm almost out of this. Oh, there's only a little tiny bit of it left. Gosh, it's great though. And there's like an ylang-ylang in it, which just this floralizing element, the sweet floral merging with the animalic musks. It's like that clean, dirty dichotomy that I love. It's just a classic, and it harkens back to the the classic musks of the 60s and 70s, Houbigant, Jovan, Coty, but takes it a step further and is more refined. But yeah, this has been a favorite of mine for about 20 years. Hello there, Daneem. Good to see you here. Thank you for tuning in. We have 28 people who are currently tuned in. Now is the time for me to check to see if we had any coffees come in. Let's see. Coffee count. We're going to do a little bit of a coffee count here. Let's take a look. And we have a winner. A winner. We have a big contributor. A big donation from High Cap 06. He had purchased 14 coffees. Very kind of you, my friend. That means you have purchased the final. I hope that you were in the United States. I want to preface by saying this is the United States only. If you're not, we can work out something else. But if you're in the United States, that does make you eligible for a 4 full bottle grab bag and a sample pack. So just check in with me and we'll arrange something. If you're outside of the US, we'll arrange something else. We'll see what else we can do there in spite of not being able to send something out. Either way, that was very kind of you. It means a great deal to me. Thank you so very much. All right, back to the chat here. And we have Douglas W. Good evening, JJ. Just joining now. Have you tried Mabet from Eris? Just discussed Mabet just a little while ago. You just missed it. And Daneem says, when will we see a JJ Colborne perfume? I'd be very interested to try it. Well, for folks who are aware, I did study perfume. Obviously, I have a lot of the perfume materials. Whether or not I get back into perfume making and that really ambitious endeavor and costly endeavor, we'll see. If I do decide to revisit it, I will certainly announce it. Because I have a lot of ideas in my head, a lot of things that I want to explore that I feel like haven't been explored enough in perfume, particular notes. And I actually wanted to do a whole video on that, on notes that I wish were more that appeared more frequently. One of them being what Darren mentioned earlier, spikenard. I think spikenard needs a little bit more coverage in perfume. The Monte Cristo smelling great. The aperture. Chef's kiss. These lovely dirty animalics. We have just one more left from the ones that I set aside. Another one that does feature costus as a note. And this is a Vierge. Donnie, you might want to help me out with this if you were still tuned in. Vierge et toreros. Vierge et toreros. From État Libre d'Orange. And this is a tuberose by way of costus. Now, I love tuberose. I had to learn to love tuberose, though. Tuberose at first was just a little over the top for me a number of years ago. I felt like, well, I can't really get on with this over the top, big personality floral, but now I actually absolutely love it. And it's not as bold here. I feel like the tuberose does take a back seat to this costus in this, and it's just so fleshy and oily and sebaceous and sensual. It's just really great. It's not as discussed as much as some of the other Eldo, État Libre d'Orange, but it's one of my favorites from the house. And I think it is a great representation of costus used in modern perfume. Some honorable mentions would be one of my favorite fragrances of all time, Le Dorien from Miller Harris, which does have costus by way of heavy labdanum and vanilla. And there's a few other fragrances that do, heavily feature costus that I have an appreciation for. But I figured this one was deserving of some showcasing. Vierge et toreros from État Libre d'Orange. So those are the 10 that I wanted to share. I'm going to stay on for about 20 more minutes here while we check into the chat. You're very welcome, JJ. I followed your reviews for a few years. I actually have a few bottles that you reviewed sitting on my shelf. See, that to me is meaningful, that I am actually connecting with other people who share this passion. And to have to make that kind of impression on others, it is humbling, because I just don't want this to be about ego. I want this about all of us sharing our love for everything fragrant. And if I'm reaching out to people that way through what I write about and what my thoughts are on fragrance, it means the world to me. The problem, okay, so now I'm going to wax philosophical now that we talked all about animalics. I guess it's now as good a time as any to talk about this stuff. I think that some of us who are lovers of perfume are getting a little wiped out, a little exhausted over egos in perfume content. And it doesn't matter if it's your normie mainstream YouTuber who has all of the gifted bottles in the background and is obviously in cahoots and partnered with brands and all that sort of stuff. Business is business. People want to make money. And that's a dead horse that I don't want to beat any further. It's also people who might very well have, the vintages and the rarities and the collection of, many rare and expensive and exotic, luxurious fragrances. It's sometimes good to kind of take a few steps back and realize that as much as this thing brings us all so much joy, it's also a luxury item. It's interesting, like the contradictions that some people make when they want to maybe put themselves on high moral ground, but then also forget that this is, there is nothing really contributing to the greater good of humanity with this. This is just a hobby that we all love and we all enjoy, and it brings much happiness to our lives, but we take it way too seriously. And I observed this, and then I felt like I was starting to be a part of it, and I was part of the conversations, and I was aligning myself, and I just felt, over time, I felt like I don't, this is not authentic to me anymore. You know, this is more about like sort of a pissing contest. And I just had to distance myself from it a little bit. You know, it shouldn't really be about that. It shouldn't really be about like who has a more refined taste and has a better understanding of fragrance and a more, impeccably curated collection, and who is, an authority, or all of that stuff. It's just the ego. It's just the ego talking. We're all learning. We're all in flux. We all have a lot that we don't know. We all do. Like it's the philosopher. I forgot who said it, and I'm not even going to quote it correctly. But the one thing for certain is that I know is that I don't know. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of that in the larger picture and looking at the grand scheme of things, it's like we should have more of a sense of humor about it. It's funny. It's funny that this is such a niche hobby. See, that's the actual definition of niche, unlike the way that niche perfume is defined. It is a niche. It's a niche hobby. Most of the world would scoff at the fact that we would spend so much energy and time and money on fragrance. So we have to remember that a lot of us have a lot more in common than we think. So the weird competition and infighting and all that kind of stuff, like it's weird. It's a little weird. Even reviewers who write blogs and who don't have a YouTube presence, there can be that kind of strange dynamic as well. But I just think that we could all stand to loosen up a little bit and realize that this is supposed to be a lot more playful, lighthearted, and fun. We're not talking about neurosurgery. We're not talking about, politics. Although, some of us would like to. Not me necessarily. We're not talking about stuff that is going to mean the difference, for the very well-being of humanity. But it's art, and it's fun, and it is also commerce. It's materialism, For example, I recall where it was recently, where there was a discussion on how to fight capitalism with perfume, and the irony of that was not lost on me because this is so built on capitalism, it was really amusing to me. Like it would seem really hypocritical and disingenuous for me to say that, like, I'm looking to fight capitalism. To avert capitalism. Capitalism is what enables all of us as perfume enthusiasts to do what we do and enjoy what we enjoy. If there wasn't that, there really wouldn't be a framework for perfume as a luxury. So I know you do. That's why I appreciate you, my friend. I can tell that you have the most refined taste of anyone. I could learn a lot from you. But yeah, I think that a lot of people have a tendency to, like, I feel like sort of self-conscious sometimes that I might feel like I'm showing off and like, oh, look at all these things that I have, all these perfumes that I've collected, all these perfume materials and stuff. But I think it depends also on the attitude that we have as well, and realizing that, like, in the end, it isn't it isn't as important as maybe all of the weight that we put on it. And then if we don't put all that weight on it and we're not like so unhealthily attached to it, when there comes a day where we might have to let go of it, we're not going to be completely devastated by it. Because, not to get grim, there could be a time in our lives where we realize that our life is being cut short, and then we would have to reassess whether all of this is really important. And maybe we could stand to remind ourselves that that day could be any day, you know? And yeah, that's my philosophical rambling. What are your thoughts? There's 25 people who are tuned in. I'm going to be on for about 15 more minutes. How do you feel about fragrance discussion? Are there some things that you would like to see a little bit less of in the ether of fragrance content in discussion? Are there some things that you would like to see and hear more of? I'd be interested in reading some of your responses. I think that I really encourage more of an interaction here, because it will also help me as well, because I'm still sort of finding my footing as far as what I want to do as far as content as well. I try to crank out one thing a week with my YouTube channel. That's as much as I can muster. So I want to make sure that whatever I am cranking out is of quality and is of value to people who are tuning in. And it's great that all 25 of you right now are tuned in live. I appreciate each and every one of you. So yeah, Just Add Light. Hi, it is Adonis. I'd love to hear more about the personal, emotional side of the experience. Yeah, I think people might gloss on that. I think people are afraid of exposing vulnerability too. I mean, there could be some vulnerability even when it comes to like, how do I really feel? You know, there's plenty to be discussed when we're thinking about fragrance. You know, all of the technical stuff and the notes. How does it smell? Who was the perfumer? There's a lot of discussion like that, you know, the very, very much the left brain kind of approach to fragrance. But as far as how they elicit emotions, what memories they might bring up, even the fact that perfume can bring up uncomfortable feelings as well. Like, I bring that up with Secretion Magnifique. Like, that perfume, for me personally, it may not be the case for everyone who smells it, but that felt uncomfortable for me, you know, or it feels uncomfortable for me when I smell it. Like, and I feel like that has some value to it as well. To have a piece of art, which I think that it is a piece of art, you know, there's a debate as to how, you know, how much perfume is art rather than craft. But but much like a movie, you know, you might watch a film and you're not necessarily going to feel the warm fuzzies. It's going to have you thinking. It's going to have you squirming in your seat and facing some concepts that might be tough to swallow. And although those kind of fragrances I would be less inclined to wear for leisure and for pleasure, there's something to be said for that. I also appreciate the visceral disgust that I get from certain fragrances that are so poorly made too. Like there's some fun in that, even though it is a bit of a schadenfreude or a bit of a, you know, embarrassment to it, a secondhand embarrassment. And it's not like it's masochistic. Like, I'm fine. You know, I lived through it. I live to tell when I smell awful perfume. And there is awful perfume. You know, like, I don't believe in, you know, giving everybody a fucking gold star for making one. There's going to be some perfumes that are god-awful. And I am going to be brutally honest about it. I think it's important. And I think it's important not to hurt, you know, not to worry about hurting feelings, because feelings need to be tempered by, you know, the rational side. Like, to put your work out there is to be ready for criticism. And that includes me, like I've had people critical of what I do as a writer. Some people think that my writing's too florid. I get too poetic. I use vocabulary that isn't accessible. And you know what? I'm not for everyone, but I'm not going to change it. It's not like I'm even getting paid to write. So I'm doing it for the joy of it. So it's not everyone's cup of tea. But I don't really take it too personally, because there's always going to be something out there for someone, And that goes for perfume as well. If there's an independent perfumer and I get a hold of their samples and I feel like there isn't really a skillful hand at the drawing board, then I'm going to call it as I smell it, And I don't think a lot of people are willing to do that because they're afraid to offend, they're afraid to hurt feelings, they're afraid of backlash. I can't hide under a rock and not have a voice. And I think also in the socio-political climate, there are things that people are really afraid to speak up about because they're worried that because others will disagree, they'll get canceled or disinvited or shunned. And we can't be afraid of that because differing opinions are so important. It's the richness of that makes us gel and glue together as a society. We can't just live in echo chambers because it ends up being this monoculture and we never really gain perspective. And then we end up raising very naive children as a result who think that their world is this insulated world of all of the same views and opinions and beliefs. So, thank you very much, Daneem. Thank you very much. Sorry for the ums. I think it's because I'm a little tired. I like associative and creative discussions of perfume, more of that and less of the expert man science stuff. Yes. Yes to that. Yes, fume-splaining, as I call it. That I'm going to step in and I'm going to rain on your parade to tell you that whatever you have in your possession is inferior and you need to get an older version, or those who say, well, actually, the perfumer had this in mind, or actually, your nose is broken. I don't smell it the way that you smell it. Scent is so subjective. And our olfactory receptors, our bulb, it receives these signals in a unique manner. None of us are smelling something exactly the same way. And that's the wonder and the fascination of our sense of smell and of perfume. And nothing gets my goat more than when somebody says, I don't get how you smell that. That's not in there. Your nose must be broken. Well, you're not in that person's head. You don't share that person's brain. And you also don't share the overall experience and reference points that person has throughout their lifetime. So it just isn't productive, constructive, helpful, or kind to say those kinds of things. But yeah, that's just a few out of many different things that I find frustrating in fragrance conversation. But people can do whatever they like. That's right. I'm not going to tell them not to do something. That's my belief as well. They have a right to. We have a right to do certain things, even though those things may not necessarily be kind. And hiccup, high cap. I don't know why I want to say hiccup, like hiccup. High cap 06. I'm sorry, my friend. I also like the discussion of what draws someone to a specific type of scent, how it makes you feel when you wear it, etc. Yeah, I think that the intuitive experience of fragrance, what pops into your head? What really is going on in your head? What are you really feeling? Like, remove yourself, disassociate yourself a bit from whatever notes pyramid for a moment. That's helpful. That's a guide. Goodness knows I use it a lot as a guide if my nose is failing me. But let's step away from that for a second. What else is coming to mind? What other sensations in the body are you feeling? Because there's bodily sensations too. I mean, think about it. I'm wearing this Monte Cristo right here. And to me, it just feels like warm closeness. It feels like erogenous zones. I don't want to get too detailed. There's some things maybe you would be what the kids call TMI, but it's sexy. It's erotic. It is a fragrance that evokes that kind of sensuality, that kind of, a not so clean body, not a filthy body, not a a hygienically deficient body, but that sort of, human body odor kind of experience. Kind of experience. The BO experience. But also with other elements in it, And then over here, aperture. Somehow it reminds me of childhood. It reminds me of curiosity in childhood and sensory curiosity. Because I remember ever since I was a very young kid, wanting to smell everything that I could possibly get my nose on, good, bad, or otherwise. And I think a lot of us as kids have that kind of curiosity. And it must be a field day for parents to make sure we don't get into trouble. But I also enjoy and respect an honest report on fragrance, free of hype and hoopla. Yeah, resist the hype. Resist the hype. And there's even going to be hype for people who are like loyalists of perfumers too. There's something suspect about someone who enjoys every single fragrance that a perfumer releases. Like, I love Christopher Sheldrake, but even he releases things that don't resonate with me. Or Jean-Claude Ellena, for example, or Bertrand Duchefort. Like, I was a little bit bummed out by Corpus Equus. I felt like that concept was so me, and the dry down is pretty generic compared to the opening development. But I still think that he's a marvelous perfumer. But people who sort of fetishize the perfumer, that the perfumer can do no wrong, is a little suspect. So there's even that kind of hype. And then, of course, the hype that you're talking about with, those who have a partnership and maybe are not all that transparent about that partnership, that can be suspect. It makes you wonder, what kind of integrity they have if, that they got a bottle and they have been coached to say positive things about it, or else their compensation's cut off. As Toucan Sam said, follow your nose. It always knows. That's true. And I've said that before. I have said, just like Toucan Sam, follow your nose. Think about things with as little bias as possible. And granted, you can't eliminate bias 100%, but to minimize it, to minimize the bias. And then after you do that, you have that experience with the fragrance, allow a little bit of it in after that and compare your notes from your initial impressions, and then compare it with what other people have gotten impressions on it. Or maybe if you weren't able to pick out all the notes, then you can visit that and see, just some comparisons with your initial intuitive observations. Just Add Light, do you think we'll see more free expression from content creators in the future as audiences become increasingly jaded about tactful disingenuousness? Here's hoping. I think that things like that reach an apex, and then there's burnout, and then people are like, okay, we're not really falling for this. We want something with a little bit more integrity and substance and meaningful engagement. I really don't think a lot of it is very meaningful engagement. It's really much, it's fueled by ego. It's fueled by money. It's fueled by the system that has, you know, in a way, it's infected a lot of people who are engaged in social media. And one one can hope that that will take a turn in a better direction, and we find a renaissance for more pithy and more relatable kinds of interaction and engagement, where there isn't so much of a concern about how many subscribers and how many followers and how much, you know, monetization somebody will get. You know, that's the thing. It's like, I just can't sit there and contribute to that if there isn't substantial conversation. And with something as niche, here we go again, something as niche as fragrance, in order to be really successful with social media, you have no choice but to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And I don't want you to take that the wrong way and say, like, to dumb people. It's not dumb. Not dumb at all. Just the average public, because it is a niche. So the more you want to widen your audience, the more you have to reach out to people who are not really a niche. So you have to be more mainstream, and you have to just follow what the audience is looking for. But I think you can transcend that. I think that it is possible. It all depends on the intention, you know? Like, I have a full-time job. I don't need to rely on this for income. So I have a lot more liberty to say what I want, do what I want, discuss what I want, and have whoever join me as panelists on my live streams, and not worry about the fact that I haven't reached 2,000 subscribers in nearly 2 years, you know? So yeah. A lot of interesting things to think about. Regis Moncton says, I'm interested in knowing more about the new frontiers concerning synthetic ingredients. Yeah, that would be very cool to explore that. And honestly, I have been out of the loop for a little while since my very long hiatus from perfume making. So there's a lot of materials out there that would be entirely new to me as well. So maybe we can share in the discovery of the new developments in synthetic perfume materials. So we have 22 people who are tuned in. I really appreciate people listening to me and thinking about these things. Just want to let you know what's going to be coming up in the pipeline here on the channel. Next Tuesday, we have the next effluvium, and that will be with Alexandra of the Perfume Chronicles. That should be really a fascinating discussion. And the next Notes and Accords is going to be rose. Just rose. If you can believe it, there are a lot of different perfume materials that can go into the construction of rose. Rose is not a monolithic scent at all. Rose can go into so many different directions. It can go from, you know, dewy and green to jammy and dark to, you know, dried to powdery to all the different varieties of fragrant rose that have certain facets to them, like peachy smelling, wine smelling, violet smelling. Oh, it just runs the gamut. So rose, there are a lot of different materials that can be used in a rose note or an accord. So there's going to be a whole two-week live stream. That'll be a marathon, a whole 2-hour live stream on rose, the synthetic natural materials, and also rose fragrances from within my collection. So that'll be the next Notes and Accords. And I plan to make a video later this week as well. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign off for now. If anybody has anything else that they want to ask, any other questions, any other requests, comments, observations, just send them on to me right now before I sign off. I'll stick around for a minute or two. I'd love to discover more rose fragrances, says Regis Monkton. Hopefully, I can be of assistance to you when we do that stream next month. I want to thank High Capo 6 once again for the Buy Me a Coffee donation. That was very kind of you. It means a great deal to me, more than I can express. Thank you very much. And I want to thank any of you who have contributed to my channel in the past several weeks and months through Buy Me a Coffee, etc., or just being here for support. I am looking for more moderators to help me out, just to make sure there's no riffraff or anything that's that I kind of miss in the chat that we might want to monitor and keep in check. So if anybody's interested in being a moderator, hit me up on Instagram if you follow me there. We can chat about adding you as a moderator. So that's going to be it for me. I hope that everybody has a great morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is where you are. I always want to just say what time it is here, but I realize you're viewing from wherever in the world. And that you have a great weekend coming up. And then you have some fun ahead of you. Let's look at the last few comments before I sign off. Thank you very much, Darren. It was wonderful to have you here as well and to help me out with my fact checking. And yeah, that was very, very helpful of you. Oh, Ceylon, just woke up, finally sing a live. I'll watch again while working during the day. Thank you very much, my friend. And Just Add Light. That was great, JJ. Thank you. By the way, that background music kind of reminded me of PF's Shine on Your Crazy Diamond at times. Yeah, I could see that. And you're wishing that everyone has a wonderful night. And Pat Lester says, great stream. Thank you so much, my friends. All right, we're going to sign off. And I'm just going to bring up the little video that represented the Animalic fragrance stream, Notes and Accords. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.